Quiver by Stephanie Spinner. This read-along is for classroom use only. Part 3. The Races. 17. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and Eros, her son, the god of love. Eros, peel me a grape. I'm busy, mother. Do as I say, darling, and I'll let you shoot someone for me. Don't you want to make some poor unsuspecting mortal fall in love? Here's your grape. Thank you, my sweet. Now, do you know where Arcadia is? It was Periphanos who told me about the race. We were riding. I had implored him to take me out, and gruff Matthias had given permission, and I had just had my first extended gallop on Callisto. Periphanos did not object when I asked to go at speed. He could see that I was sure of my balance now. Crouching atop Callisto with her mane whipping my face, overtaking and then passing Periphanos' big bay, I was happier than I had been since coming to the palace. The euphoria ended far too quickly. When we slowed to a trot and Periphanos caught up with us, he told me that I would be racing my first suitor the following day. My heart slammed. Tomorrow? I managed to ask. How do you know? Matthias heard it from Pistos. The old man who served wine at dinner was also my father's personal attendant. I reminded myself that Periphanos, like Pistos, was in my father's employ, and that my father must think I was eager to race. Who hastens here so eagerly to meet his death? I asked lightly, as if I were asking what meats would be served at dinner. Yet the thought of what lay ahead sickened me. How could anyone come forward knowing the conditions I had set? Wholly disheartened, I looked down at the reins in my hand. The threat of death, a strategy I had thought so ingenious, so wonderfully clever, had not kept anyone away, and now I would have to kill a man. It was horrible, like being wrapped in a poisonous cloak of my own design. I do not know, said Periphanos. No matter, I thought. My father would be quite pleased to tell me. Periphanos watched me impassively. If he sensed my distress, he gave no sign. Another gallop? He asked. As long as it's not back to the palace. This made him smile. Thank you for telling me about tomorrow, I said. Before he could reply, I urged Callisto forward. It took him a long time to catch us. 18. Entella brought up the race while she arranged my hair before dinner. I was not surprised. Entella knew everything that went on in the palace, from who dented the king's goblet, Pistos, who had dared to blame it on her daughter Agnos, to what Nephele took for her monthly headaches, feverfew. Your first suitor, she exclaimed, as her hands braided tirelessly. Well, who is he? I was going to ask you that, I said. Me? She feigned surprise. You might have heard something, I replied blandly, from Pistos or Nephele. Pistos never tells me anything, she said. He stopped when your mother died. I said some things about the king. Pistos is very loyal to him. And Nephele? The Lady Nephele knows only what the king tells her. From the way she said it, I guessed it was very little. Poor Nephele, I thought. Did my father love my mother? I had wanted to ask this from the time Entella had told me about my mother's death. What a question! She exclaimed, this time with genuine surprise. I shrugged. You must know, I said. If the answer did not come from Entella, it would not come at all, for I would never ask my father. He did love her, she said slowly, and with great conviction. He loved her dearly. Her hand slowed. One day when they were newly married, I saw him do something. I was just a girl, but I have never forgotten it. I bowed my head, waiting. Your mother was at the gates on her horse. They were saying goodbye. Just before she rode away, your father leaned over and kissed her leg. I tried to picture it and could not. The look they exchanged made me blush, she said, all the way down to my toes. So they were happy? The words cost me effort. At first. She would not say it, so I did. Until I was born. Her hands stopped, settling on my shoulders. She had a warm, kindly touch, and I was grateful for it. I let my head fall back so that it rested on her bosom. I had no memories of my infancy, only Castor's account of finding me, alone and naked, in a she-bear's den. You looked like a fat, filthy grub, he liked to say. with cheeks pink from howling. He would always add, thanks to the goddess, but it was years before I knew why. At length, Entella said, she could not forgive him, and he would not let her leave. But she found a way, I thought. I closed my eyes against the hot sting of tears and saw my mother's horse picking its way back to the palace. What had my father felt, I wondered, when it appeared without her? Grief? Remorse? Rage? Fear? Whatever it was, I thought, it had not changed him. He was a tyrant then, and he was a tyrant now. A defiant voice inside me said, do not let him crush you. I took a deep breath. Entella, I said, I need poison. Can you find some for me? Oh! This was almost a shriek, and Aura, who lay at my feet, started in alarm. How can you ask me such a thing? Cried Entella. I will not help you take your own life. No, no, I protested. You misunderstand. The poison is not for me. It is for my opponent. Your opponent? What opponent? She was so agitated that beads of sweat appeared on her upper lip. Please, calm yourself, I said, forcing her to sit. I will explain why I need it if you will only listen. She dried her face on her hem. When her bosom stopped heaving, I said, I do not wish to marry. My father insists on it. So I have set conditions. That is why I'm racing. And the poison? You have not heard? I asked. She shook her head. So Pistos has been quiet, I thought, surprised. My suitors must race me, I told her. Those who lose must die. Die? She was incredulous. I nodded unhappily. No man can outrun me, I said. I have proved it many times. Some have even called me, I lowered my voice lest the gods take offense, the swiftest mortal alive. I thought my reputation would keep suitors away. I was wrong. It seems the threat of death is alluring, I grimaced, and now I must honor the conditions I set. I thought of Castor, who had taught me that honor was keeping one's word. What would he make of these happenings, I wondered. I would give a great deal to know. So you are determined not to marry? Asked Entella. Yes. Why? I have my reasons. After a moment I said, I was always told that the goddess Artemis saved my life. I took a vow of chastity in her honor years ago. Before I came here, she sent me a sign, a warning against marriage. I cannot ignore it. Entella's solemn expression told me she understood, and I was grateful. I thought offering poison would be kinder. As soon as I said this, it sounded foolish and stupid to me. Death was death. Will you help me? I pleaded, taking her hand. You are the only one I can ask. When she hesitated, I said, I do not want to cause anyone's death, but if the first dies, the other may stay away. That is my hope. She squeezed my hand and told me she would do what she could. Her words so reassured me that I felt easier about hearing my father's announcement, which came promptly after his third glass of wine. 19. I took the news calmly. Tomorrow, I echoed, wiping my hands daintily on my chiton. We were eating goat. Good. A run will be welcome. As far as I knew, my father was ignorant of my pre-dawn excursions. Matthias tells me you've been riding, he said. Have you? Nephalie looked at me wide-eyed. She was the kind of soft, fluttery woman who feared all four-legged creatures but kittens. I hope you don't mind, I replied. It is very diverting. Not at all. I watched him drink, wondering if he had thought of my mother when he heard of my affection for horses. I hoped so. For a moment I seethed with dark, vengeful thoughts. I am sure the race tomorrow will be diverting also, he said. Particularly as you know your suitor, or so he claims. Oh, who is he? Cepheus. He says he was on the hunt with you. Cepheus. I nearly spat out my food. You do know him, then? Well enough, I thought, with dislike, seeing his close-set eyes and perpetual sneer. Why has he come forward? I demanded. He says he loves you, said my father, smiling at my loss of composure. Can he be lying? Why would he lie? Asked Nephalie. He hates me, I said. When his friend Ancaeus was killed on the hunt, Cepheus held me responsible. Then why would he want to marry you? Inquired my father. Perhaps he's deranged, I said. And Caius's death may have pushed him into madness. Grief drives people to extremes, I added pointedly, as you know. My father blinked. Otherwise ignoring the reference to my mother, he said, "He seems rational enough, most definitely in his right mind. Healthy, too." He cocked his head. "He looks as strong as a bull." You are disgusting, I thought. Crazed or sane, it makes no difference, I said, rising. The man is slow on his feet. I went back to my chamber and wept. 20. I ran the next morning. When I was deep in the forest at my rough shrine, I made an offering and prayed. I asked Artemis to watch over me. I dedicated the race to her. I requested a merciful death for Cepheus. Then I ended my prayers I always did, with the words, "I am yours." Apollo and Artemis. "A small wager, sister? We both know she'll win." "True. Too bad victory comes at such a price." "Her decision." "She made it because of you." "You sent her the dreams." "Have you no mercy? She's in a terrible predicament." "She can handle it. If she couldn't, I'd still have my ivory quiver, wouldn't I?" The course was short, about 16 acres. It began far below the walls, at the point where the ground leveled, and followed the narrow footpath that encircled the palace. My father had taken the trouble to have the path widened, smoothed, and spread with sand, niceties that surprised me. Perhaps he imagined many such races. May the gods forbid it, I thought. I wore a short chiton, and now I tucked the small horn vial of poison inside my belt. Entella had told me the stuff was deadly and swift. The faster the better, I had said, wishing the morning were over. A small crowd waited near the course. Guards, servants, and a few others I had come to know, like Matthios, Perphanos, and Pistos. Entella was there with little Agnos and Galene, the daughters who had helped her in the kitchen. My father and Nephele had not yet arrived, although chairs had been set out for them. I remembered Cepheus's characteristic expression as somewhere between a glower and a sneer, but when he saw me he simply stared and kept on staring as I came down the hill. He left his companions, 4 well-oiled, muscular young men, to join me near the track. "Greetings, Atalanta," he said loudly, fixing me with his dark, close-set eyes. He looked unusually clean, I thought, and then the last time I had seen him he had been drenched in boar's blood. "Greetings, Cepheus," I replied. "I'm surprised to find you here." He swallowed several times before replying, and a flush crept up his thick neck. "I'm surprised also," he confessed. Then he made an abrupt, harsh braying sound that could only be laughter. "And I will be surprised if I win this race," he went on. "But I could not stay away." Here was a Cepheus I did not know. Awkward, bewildered, almost humbled. Great gods on the mountain, I thought, looking away. What is he trying to tell me? At this moment my father appeared. He was as pale as a spectre, and so weak that Nephele and Matthios had to help him into his high-backed chair. "I see that you two are renewing your friendship," he said approvingly. Friendship, I thought. That is not what I would call it. He settled himself and looked out at the crowd, which quickly fell silent. "You are witnesses to this race," he announced in his deep voice, "between my daughter Atalanta and Prince Cepheus of Arcadia. If the prince wins, he and Atalanta will marry. If Atalanta wins, the prince will die." There was an audible intake of breath. Some spectators, it seemed, were hearing the terms of the contest for the first time. My father looked over at us. He raised a skeletal hand. "At my signal," he said. We crouched. I could feel Cepheus staring, but kept my eyes resolutely on my father's hand until it fell. Then I began to run at a very moderate pace. Cepheus charged forward, pumping his arms and scrambling into the lead, a feat that drew loud acclamation from his friends. I let him stay ahead as we took the first turn at the southwest corner of the palace. I had no desire to humiliate him. As we ran north, there were cries from above. The stable boys were atop the walls, screaming encouragement, their voices as high and piercing as the whistles they used to summon the horses from the fields. "Faster, princess, faster!" called chorus. "Don't trot, gallop!" I waved to him. A few of the guards stationed on the wall called out to Cepheus, who was able to maintain his speed as we started uphill. I caught up to him just past the northwest corner. It was the point at which the track fell behind the palace, and where we would be visible only to those on the wall. Even they, however, could not hear what we said. "Cepheus!" I called, loping beside him. He turned, and there was such a naked hope on his face that my gut clenched with pity. He actually thought I might let him win. I held out the vial. "Take it," I said, "quickly." When it was in his hand, I told him what it was. He was too breathless to speak, but he shook his head once violently and threw down the vial without breaking stride. I retrieved it and caught up to him. "Please take it," I begged. "There isn't much time." We would soon round the third northeast corner where the final stretch began. I lay my hand on his broad forearm, and for a moment he slowed. I could feel the blood pumping beneath his skin. "It is best this way," I told him, hating the empty words. In truth, the poison was just as much for me as for him. I could not bear to see him strangled or beheaded. I was overcome with such self-loathing that I shuddered. There was fear in his eyes now, and he was panting too heavily to reply. The sound he made was awful, like tree limbs groaning in winter wind. I pressed the vial into his hand. "I'm sorry," I said. Then I ran to my victory. 21. Aphrodite and Eros. "You shot the wrong person, you naughty boy." "I did?" "Stop giggling. You know Atalanta was meant to be your target." "Sorry." "You're not, but never mind. You'll have another chance very soon." My next suitor, a Cretan prince in ringlets and gold earrings, arrived 2 days later. Many silk-clad young men came with him, chattering amongst themselves as if they were attending a court celebration rather than a contest with a truly terrible second prize. The prince could neither speak nor understand our dialect, but one of his friends knew a little Achaean. Whispering and gesticulating, he attempted to translate my father's words to the crowd. I do not think he succeeded, for when the speech ended, the prince and his party looked entertained rather than apprehensive. I offered the poison mid-race, but my efforts to tell the prince what it was and why he should take it failed. When at last I simply pressed the vial into his hand, he smiled as if I had given him a love token. I ran the final lap, wishing that I were far, far away from my father and his noxious demands. 3 others came after the Cretan prince. I won against them all. I began to feel like an executioner, and thought often of my childhood fascination with tales of human sacrifice in Arcadia. Whispered talk of men hunted like stags, throats cut, and strange prayers uttered had once thrilled and horrified me in the way that cruelty excites the young. But my own experience of human sacrifice, for that is how I came to view the races, did not thrill me in any way. Rather, I felt a constant dull nausea. The knowledge that in keeping my word I was pleasing no one, not the gods, not my father, and least of all my suitors, was truly sickening. My daily prayers to the goddess had once given me a comfort. Now they were dreary. I wanted the races to end. I wanted the suitors to stay away, as I had always meant them to. I wanted the goddess to intervene on my behalf. My desperation and self-pity were unworthy of her, yet I expressed them time and time again. I had never known such a dismal confusion. Then Entella told me she was running out of poison. Aphrodite and Eros. "I heard the prayers of the nicest young man today. He's called Epaminondas, and he's madly in love with Atalanta." "Ha! He's doomed." "He was so sweet, he did a full prostration." "Face down on the ground?" "Yes, I haven't seen one in ages, have you?" "No." "It quite won me over. A few mortals show the proper humility when they supplicate, have you noticed?" "I've never been supplicated, Mother. It's you they implore and beseech, not me." "Oh, nonsense. At any rate, Epaminondas nearly wept with gratitude when I gave him the 3 golden apples." "Apples? What for?" "To throw ahead of Atalanta when they race. She'll stop to pick them up, and he'll run ahead of her. Clever, no?" "What if she doesn't stop?" "That's where you come in, my precious." 22. 2 days, then 3, went by without a single suitor. I rambled around the palace with Aura, rode Callisto, and entertained the wild hope that all young men rash enough to race me had already done so. Perhaps the rest had been frightened away. I began to think of returning to my people, that it might just be possible if there were no more races. In that event, how could my father object? He might even be glad to see his troublesome daughter go, and what a fine thing that would be, I thought, to bid him farewell victoriously. I wondered if he would let me keep Callisto. Then his health declined, and he took to his bed. In his absence, the meals I shared with Nephele were almost dreamily serene, punctuated by little grunts of satisfaction rather than conversation. This peaceful interlude ended on the 5th day, when Entella reported that my father was feeling better. "He left his bed this noon," she said. Ah, I must have slumped, for her next words were, "Please raise your head, my lady, so I can finish your hair." I sat up. "Will he dine with us tonight?" I asked. "Yes." Thus warned, I prepared myself for more of my father's dinner-time despotism, the silky animosity, the fitful drunken outbursts, but I was not prepared for his appearance. He was pale to the point of transparency, nor his first words. "Another suitor comes tomorrow," he told me, "and he will be your last." "Why is that?" "Because I am sick to death of these delays. I am the king. You will obey me." "And if I do not?" "There will be consequences." He hit the table with all the force he could muster, and his heavy gold rings clinked against the wood. "My lord, please," entreated Nephele. He ignored her. "Dire consequences," he raged. I thought of my mother, hanging from a tree. "Dire consequences," I repeated. "Would you drive me to suicide as well?" His eyes grew wider and his mouth moved as if he would speak, but he did not. I got to my feet. If there is a man who can outrun me, I will wed him. If no such man appears, I will remain chaste. That is my vow. I have made it to Artemis as well as you, and I will keep it. I must keep it," I added, "for I owe her my life, the life she saved when you tried to kill me." Nephele made a sound of distress. She was staring at my father in disbelief. He had managed, somehow, to avoid telling her the truth about me. Hearing it now, she stared at him open-mouthed, waiting for a denial or an explanation. Again, he said nothing. "Artemis is the god of childbirth," I said. "If she wishes you to have an heir, you will have one. If not, your line will end with me." Apollo and Artemis. "I think I'm falling in love." "Oh, stop." "I pity her next suitor. Actually, I pity all her suitors." "What a sorry lot. And they keep coming. They try and try and try, when it's perfectly clear that they'll lose. That's what mortals do. Remind me never to take divinity for granted." 23. There were few spectators the next day. 2 shepherds, some ragged children, Entella and her daughters, and the ever-faithful stable boys, who perched restlessly atop the palace walls like big unruly birds. I was impatient for the race to start, only because I wanted it to be over, and I saw with annoyance that my father and Nephele had not yet appeared. I looked around for my opponent. Almost always the suitors came with companions, court friends who dispensed urgently whispered advice and hearty slaps of encouragement before the race. But today there was no such ensemble. Instead, I saw a lone figure standing under a tree, a tall, broad-shouldered, fair-haired young man. He was watching me. His golden brown eyes did not waver as he approached, but held mine. Just as I was thinking that he was remarkably self-possessed for someone who was about to die, I felt a piercing blow to my heart. I had seen men shot by arrows, the way they staggered and doubled over with pain. I could see no arrow, yet I had felt one. I whimpered in fright, staggering a little. With the blow, my dull nausea sharpened, overpowering me, and I retched. Undeterred, the young man offered his hand. "Princess," he said. He was extremely handsome. I shook my downcast head, backing away unsteadily. I could not reply. My throat was convulsing and my mouth was filling with spittle. "I am going to vomit," I thought frantically. "What has happened to me?" I spat. At this he jumped back. "Atalanta, what ails you?" This was my father, who had arrived in a chair borne by 4 attendants. He sounded both petulant and suspicious, as if he thought I was feigning illness to avoid the race. Suddenly I remembered Zoe's words to me at Gortys. She had told me I would suffer a wound sometime in the future. Had I just been wounded? I ran my hands up and down my arms. My skin was intact, but I could swear by the goddess that I had been shot. Nephele hurried to my side. "Are you ill?" she asked. "No," I blurted, acutely aware of my bare-chested suitor. He stood close to me, giving off the scent of clove. It was very pleasant. I took a deep breath. "Are you certain?" she pressed. "I am," I said, and I was, for my nausea was gone, taking with it every worry, care, vile preoccupation, and misgiving that I had been crowding in my mind. Suddenly I felt as bright and weightless as a glint of sunlight. I placed my hand on Nephele's shoulder. "I am," I repeated, willing her to return to my father. She did. Now I noticed that the young man's watchful amber eyes were slightly up-tilted, that his generous, well-defined mouth had an upward curve of immense charm, and that his complexion was unusually tawny for someone with such fair hair. His skin looked very smooth. I yearned to touch it so badly that my fingers twitched. "I am Hippomenes," he said. "Atalanta," I replied. "I know that." He smiled. I flushed. "Of course you do," I managed. "It is good to see you again." "Again?" I have watched you and thought about you," he said, "ever since the boar hunt in Caledon." "The hunt? You were there?" I wondered how I had failed to notice him. He nodded. "I saw you hit the boar. It was an unforgettable sight. You looked so invincible." Remembering, I grimaced. "That is not how I felt," I said. Hippomenes regarded me gravely for a moment. Then he said, "Meleager's uncles behaved very badly. They were the elders. They should have known restraint." No one had thought to say this to me before. I had hardly been able to think it. Hearing the words, I felt both relief and gratitude. "Who are you?" I yearned to ask Hippomenes. "How do you know me so well?" It was at this moment that my father chose to begin his address. I had heard his speech often enough so that I could give it myself, but now as he concluded with the familiar words, "If Atalanta wins, the prince must die," I stopped breathing. "Die," I thought, appalled. I glanced over at Hippomenes. He crouched in readiness, muscles taut, eyes on the track. "At my signal," called my father. Eros and Apollo. "This should be good." "She'll win. She always wins." "Maybe not. I think she's smitten. Do you see the way she was looking at him?" "She looks the way she always looks, determined." "How about a small wager? I say she loses." "You're too young to gamble. Besides, you don't have anything I want." "I have forgetfulness powder, and elixir of convulsive lust." "Do you? The powder sounds good." "Zeus uses it on Hera all the time. One little sprinkle, and she forgets she's a jealous wife." "Really? That sounds very useful." "It never fails. Anyway, if I bet the powder, what will you bet? How about that quiver?" "This? I don't know. It's such a handsome thing." "So you are afraid she'll lose." "All right, the quiver." He had long legs and a stride to match, and made a good fast start when my father's hand came down. Not a bad runner, I thought, catching up to him without difficulty. I ran alongside him for the first stretch, which seemed shorter than I remember. No words passed between us, but we were close, and for the moment alone. I stole a glance at him as we took the first turn. He was looking at me. When our eyes caught, I could not help but smile. We began to run uphill, and he fell back. I slowed a little, moving to the outside and shortening my stride. It would be tricky to regulate the distance between us so that it did not grow, I thought. Speeding up was so much easier. I was not accustomed to reducing my pace. Until now, I had always run to win. I put myself just far enough ahead of him so that I could hear his breathing. Something shot past me, shimmering in the air like a bit of rainbow. It fell to the ground directly in my path and lay there glowing. Its muzzy radiance lured me like a song. Even thinking, "Go on, keep running," I could not. I stopped and picked it up. It was an apple made of gold. Artemis and Apollo. "What in holy Hades is that?" "I don't know, but she's taking a long time to look at it." "Blast! He's running ahead and she's just standing there. She'll lose the race if she doesn't hurry." Odd. "Do something. Tell her to run." "Maybe I will. and maybe I won't. 24. I turned the apple slowly in my hand. It was an enchanting thing, heavy, warm to the touch, its greenish gold surface textured with all the dots and speckles and tiny bumps of a real apple. It even gave off a faint perfume, but when I sniffed it, I smelled not apple, but clove. Clove, I thought. Hippomenes smelled of clove. Had he thrown it? I sniffed it again, my nose wrinkled in pleasure. I lifted the golden fruit to my mouth, intending to taste it, and heard the steady beat of footsteps. Hippomenes ran past me, casting a quick glance my way. I stood there holding the apple, admiring his muscular back and his wide, elegant shoulder blades as he ran up the incline of the second stretch. It occurred to me that I had never before seen a man who looked as good from the back as from the front, and that this was, in its way, a most appealing quality. "Run, princess, run!" Screeching like jays, the stable boys atop the palace wall startled me into motion. Tucking the apple into my belt, and feeling with a shock the vial of poison, I took the uphill stretch at speed, coming abreast of Hippomenes at the second turning. There I slowed sharply, and for a moment or two we ran along the back wall in tandem. When his breathing grew labored, I came down to a walk, then stopped. Suddenly we were almost touching. I looked up at him. "Thank you for the apple," I said. "It is beautiful." He struggled to catch his breath. On his heaving chest, a trickle of sweat meandered down toward his navel, then disappeared into a fine line of golden hair. "You are welcome," he replied, and we stood there looking at each other. It was an oddly comforting moment, like the time I had first entered the cave at Gortys. I had felt then as if I were returning to a much-loved, long-forgotten place. Here with Hippomenes, I felt the same. Sparrows trilled. Aphrodite's bird, I thought absently. It occurred to me that the goddess of love had never once appeared to me, in dreams or otherwise. The sparrows trilled again until the air chimed with their sweet liquid call. Hippomenes took my hand. "Marry me," he said. The stable boys came skittering along the top of the wall, drowning out the birdsong with their shouts. They had seen me slow my pace on this stretch before, seen me exchange words with other suitors. I suspected that they might even know about the poison, but they had never seen me stop, much less permit a suitor to touch me, and there was a note of alarm in their cries. They do not know what to make of this, I thought, nor do I. Then my skin prickled the way it sometimes did before a storm, and a tremor shook the air. It shook me too, so that I knew the goddess was near. She has come to speed me along, I thought, and for the first time in my life I was afraid of her. I withdrew my hand from Hippomenes. "Only if you win the race," I said, a little more loudly than was necessary. Then I took flight. 25. I had scarcely gone 10 paces when I saw a streak of gold fly past me like an arrow. It was a second apple from Hippomenes. This one fell far from the track, rolling all the way to the forest's edge. It would take much longer to retrieve than the first. I ran to it as if pulled. It lay beaming in a clump of ferns, and seemed to brighten as I picked it up. Its yellow gold surface was adorned with flecks and speckles, and even a tiny wormhole, and when I sniffed it, I again smelled clove. I rubbed the apple dreamily against my cheek, turning it this way and that in my best imitation of wonder, and listened for Hippomenes. At last I heard his footsteps. Slow, too slow, I thought, as he passed me by. He was a strong runner by ordinary standards, but no match for me. And of all those watching the race, Artemis knew this best. She who must believe I was trying to win had seen me run at twice this speed for my own amusement. If she suspected the truth, that I was allowing Hippomenes to overtake me, she would never smile on me again. I could live without her favor, I thought, but inciting her displeasure was something else entirely. I had seen enough of her cruel, implacable anger on the hunt to last me for the rest of my life. I quailed at the thought of becoming its target. Yet death was cruel and implacable also, I thought, tucking the second apple into my waist. If the goddess had her way, I would win this race just as I had won the others, and death would take Hippomenes too. It was a heinous thought. I reached the track just as he rounded the turn onto the final stretch. I could close the gap between us with little effort, but I did not. I held steady. His pace increased. This was a surprise. I had not thought him capable of greater speed. Helped by the downhill slope, he ran even faster. I fought my urge to lengthen my stride. Then, perhaps spurred to greater effort by the sight of the finish post, he ran faster still, and the gap between us grew. I could see my father in the distance, sternly upright in his chair, and wondered if he was steeling himself for yet another defeat. Probably. In every other race, I had run at a moderate pace until the midpoint of the final stretch, the one Hippomenes was about to pass. Then I would truly hurry, running so fast that my hair flew straight behind me like a stick, or so Entella said. Finishing this way, in a sudden ferocious burst of speed, I would reach the post far ahead of my opponent. After I won, I liked to walk over to my father, stand before him, and look steadily into his eyes for a moment before I strode away. He could not suspect that today would be different, I thought. How could he? Then Hippomenes threw another golden apple. Aphrodite and Eros. She's slowing down. She's going to follow the apple. Those apples were such an inspiration, if I do say so myself. And you shot her too, didn't you, darling? Let's keep that secret. Why? No special reason. Look, there goes Hippomenes. Yet another one, I thought. He is persistent. The third apple was red gold, gaudy and beautiful against the blue of the sky. It came down slowly, as if choosing where to land, then hit the earth about 100 paces away and set off towards a dry stream bed. Hippomenes was nearly at the finish post. If I chased this apple, as I had chased the others, I would have to push very hard to overtake him. I might actually lose the race. That's what you want, isn't it? I asked myself, and the question stopped me like a wall. I had never lost a race. Now that possibility was upon me, I clutched my sides in panic. My right hand touched something small and unyielding through the folds of cloth at my waist. Puzzled, I ran my fingers over it. Poison. The merciful death I provided for my suitors. No more of this, I thought, plucking the vial from my waistband and casting it away. No more. I did not want to lose. Even less, however, did I want Hippomenes to die. Apollo and Artemis. What did she just throw? The poison. Really? Then give her another push. It won't do any good. What do you mean? Girls of her age often behave this way. They're chaste, they're pure, they're utterly devoted, and then, in a blink, they change. Suddenly I'm part of their childhood like a discarded toy. I could have sworn she'd be different, but why would she be? I'm not sure I understand you. Have you seen Eros around here recently? Aphrodite's son? Now that you mention it, yeah, he's been around. He shot her. Atalanta? You think so? Why else would she let Hippomenes take the lead? She's in love. Eros shot her? I'd swear to it. He looks sweet and harmless, but those golden arrows of his are surprisingly potent. Sometimes their effect lasts for years. Blast that pudgy little toad. He tricked me. Tricked you? How? Never mind. Oh, look, there goes Atalanta. 26. I chased the apple, and then I chased my suitor. As I drew closer to him, I remembered Zoe's prediction at the beach at Gortys, that poets would sing of my strength, and my courage, and my wild spirit. Her words had amazed me, for I had often yearned for glory, but secretly and without hope. Only men were heroes, never women, and it had always been so. Zoe had made me think that that would change. Will the poets sing of me if I lose? I wondered, coming abreast of Hippomenes. Then I thought, they will if they're clever. Win or lose, it makes a good story. I fell into step with Hippomenes, and we ran side by side, as we had at the start of the race. But now he was breathing so hard that his mouth was agape, and his eyes were wide with effort and fear. He looked like a hunted stag. We were almost at the finish post, and he could see that I was running entirely without strain. It would be easy for me to pull ahead, even now, and he knew it. 3 paces from the finish, I felt his eyes on me. I tilted my head so that he alone could see my face, and I smiled. Then I shortened my stride by a hand's breadth, the hand's breadth of a child, and we came to the end of the race. Aphrodite and Eros. I won! Hippomenes won, you mean? Yes, Hippomenes won. She certainly kept me in suspense all the way to the end. Are you sure you hit her with your arrow? I hit her, Mother. She loves him. That's why she lost. Poor boy. He's going to have his hands full. He took my hand and squeezed it hard, while his chest heaved and his head came down. His wet hair clung to his neck in dark tendrils. I smelled clove and sweat. When he could speak, he whispered his thanks so passionately that I blushed. There were sparrows chirping, and few murmurs of surprise from the crowd, but for a time I was aware of little else but Hippomenes and the feel of his hand gripping mine. Then my father cleared his throat. He looked dumbfounded, as if I had just metamorphosed into a cyclops. For once he was truly at a loss for words. The outcome of the race had rendered him speechless. He is an old man, very near death, I thought, and I pitied him. "Father," I said, stepping forward, "will you award the victor?" In case he had forgotten, I added, "he is called Hippomenes." My father recovered himself and beckoned to Hippomenes, who knelt before him. The gathering fell silent. "Today is an auspicious day," said my father, "and a hopeful one for our kingdom. In winning against my daughter, Atalanta, swiftest of mortals, Hippomenes has also won her hand. There will be no death today, but a celebration, a wedding feast." At this, Nephele fairly bobbed with happiness. My father raised his voice, declaiming with mock solemnity, "You are a lucky man, Hippomenes. The gods must love you." This drew laughter, as well as a modest shake of the head from my betrothed. "Forgive me, goddess," I thought. "Be merciful." Looking my way, my father added, "May they love you even more when Atalanta is your wife." It was his way of saying he wanted a grandson as quickly as possible, and again there was laughter. Hippomenes cast a sidelong glance my way, and my toes curled. I resolved to make an offering to Artemis without delay. Eros and Apollo. "The ivory quiver, please." "You little cheat! You shot Atalanta and made her fall in love. It wasn't a fair bet." "She lost, I won. Hand it over." "I'm warning you, Eros. This isn't the kind of thing I take lightly, and when Artemis hears about it, she'll be furious. My sister has a hair-raising temper, you know, much worse than mine. It's as bad as Zeus's." "I'll try to remember that. And if you ever want to place another bet, no more bets for me. Too bad. The stakes on whether she has a boy or girl are going to be sky high." 27. I am chaste no more, but my modesty is intact. So I will say only this of my wedding night. My father leered, Nephele wept, and Entella fussed, but Hippomenes' ardor made up for it all. I had never expected to leave my girlhood with such joy, yet I did. As he and I lay entwined, watching the night fade away, we spoke softly of many things. He told me about his homeland, Mycenae, the great city to the east, and his family. I told him about mine. When I spoke of my mother, haltingly, for I had never done so before, save with Entella, he stroked my face. At first light he told me of his prayers to Aphrodite and her gift of the golden apples. "She said they would enchant you, that you would chase them because you were a woman and all women love gold. Even so, I feared you would not." I asked why. "Because you are not like the other women," he said, stroking my cheek, "and I knew it from the moment I saw you." "When was that?" I asked. "When we gathered for the hunt. You were talking with Jason and stringing your bow. At first I thought you were a man because of your height. Then I came closer." He took my hand. "I remember thinking you were unlike any woman I had ever seen, and more beautiful." He raised my hand to his lips and kissed it. "I feared you might disdain the apples, or that they would not interest you. You used them, though." "They were all I had," he said. "I loved you, and I wanted you. Aphrodite answered my prayers. When she offered her help, I could not really quibble about the form it took, could I?" I shook my head. "I won because you let me win," he said. "Yes. Why?" I turned. "When we first spoke, I felt as if I knew you, somehow, and that you knew me. You felt familiar. The feeling grew stronger as we raced. At the end, I could not bear to think of you dead." I could just see his smile in the waning dark. Presently he said, "Your father was right." "About what?" "I am a lucky man." We stayed in all that day and night, attended by Galene and Agnos, who swept our chamber, sprinkled it with lavender, brought food and water at regular intervals, and never glanced at Hippomenes without blushing. I could not fault them. Still, I was always impatient for them to go, as I longed to be gazing at him or touching him myself. Even Aura, who had taken up residence on the dusty old tiger skin, was besotted. If he so much as spoke her name, her ears flew back and she scuttled over to him adoringly. The next day he left me before dawn, and she went with him. When they returned, she had something long and slender in her mouth. She carried it as carefully as if it were a newborn pup. Artemis and Apollo. Whatever happened to my quiver? Quiver? What quiver? The ivory one that you won from me? Oh, I misplaced it. I'm sure it'll turn up. You lost it? Oh, heavens, just look at the sky. If I don't hitch up my chariot, sunrise will be late. What's that? I asked, stretching contentedly. Sunshine flashed in the tiger's glass eye, making it wink. It was mid-morning. I had been sleeping for hours. Oh, something for you, said Eponymes, urging Aura forward. She set the thing on the bed. It was a quiver of pale animal horn, edged with gold, adorned with delicate carvings of the waxing and waning moon. 2 quail feathers hung from its red leather strap, which was sewn with tiny, perfectly even stitches. I picked it up. It was as smooth and slender as a deer's shinbone, nearly weightless, and infinitely pleasing to hold. This is a treasure, I said, thinking I had never seen anything so finely wrought. Castor's bows, even the golden apples, paled before it. It might have been made by Hephaestus. The smith god's works were so beautiful that he was thought to be more of a sorcerer than a craftsman. Eponymes smiled. It is worthy of you. I thanked him with an embrace. Presently he told me that he had found the quiver in the forest, on the moss-covered banks of a stream, after offering to Eros. Eros? I was surprised to hear the boy god's name. He was a capricious, heartless creature, who took pleasure in tormenting gods and mortals alike with sudden, inexplicable passions. In his way I thought he was more frightening than Pan, who amused himself by broadcasting fear. Why were you offering to him? Gratitude, said Eponymes. I felt his watchful golden eyes on me as I took in his meaning. 2 breaths, 3, and I had it. So I thought. Zoe was right. I did suffer a wound, a powerful one. The pain I felt when I first met Eponymes had been Eros's invisible arrow. It had pierced my heart, and I had fallen in love. My mind struggled with this like a fish on a line. Did you invoke him? I asked. He shook his head. I was only supplicating Aphrodite. The apples were hers, but the rest. My love for you? He looked stricken. Are you angry? He asked. I shook my head. It was not anger, but a need to be alone that caused me to dress so hastily. When I was at the door, he asked me where I was going. I too have offerings to make, I said. 28. Entella told me where to go, to the hill west of the palace near Lord Zeus's sanctuary. It did not take me long to get there. I had seen the tall, lightning-riven oak many times during my morning runs. The sanctuary overlooked fields, forests, and the blue-green river Losios, where the god had bathed as a child. Moss on the altar and a cold fire pit told me the place was long out of use, but it was sacred ground, and I trod carefully. I had never noticed the tomb before. It was not far from the oak, yet unlike the great blasted tree, it was not a feature of the landscape. It was regal enough. Its stones were large and polished, and it enjoyed the same majestic view as the sanctuary, but it was set into the hillside so that it could not be seen from the palace. This made perfect sense, I thought. My father was not one to acknowledge his shortcomings. Why would he wish to be reminded of the worst mistake of his life? I sank down before the tomb and bowed my head. Mother, I whispered, I am your lost girl, Atalanta. If you grieve for me, grieve no more. I am 16 years old, tall and strong, and fast on my feet. Entella says I resemble you. Now love has come my way. That and learning to ride a horse have made me very happy. I hope with all my heart these tidings bring you peace. As I got to my feet, a dog barked in the distance. It was Aura, who covered my face with kisses when I bent to greet her. She came with me into the forest, settling nearby when I reached my shrine. It was a rough thing, a simple rock platform, but I kept it clean and placed a flower there every day. Now I knelt before it, palms on my knees, and composed myself as best I could. After a time I said, "Merciful goddess, please hear me. I swore to remain chaste, and I am chaste no longer. I vowed not to marry, and now I am a wife. I pledged my life to you, wanting to be yours always, yet somehow, without willing it, I have changed." I closed my eyes. "Nevertheless," I confessed, "I am happy." "Goddess," I said, "I never meant to offend you. I never intended to stray from your company. I will always be grateful for your mercy, and I thank you most humbly for allowing me to take love where I found it." I opened my eyes, half expecting to feel her there, but the air was still and limpid, the forest hushed. I held the quiver aloft. "Please accept this offering," I said. Then I set it on the shrine. Artemis and Apollo. "I'm touched." "Yeah, you should be." "I can't help wondering how she got the quiver, though." "Oh, why trouble yourself? It's yours again. That's what matters." "I suppose you're right. Want to go hunting?" "Let's." Aura saw Hippomenes before I did. He had stationed himself near the northwest corner of the palace and was looking first in one direction, then another, as we started downhill. She barked and charged ahead toward him. Seeing us, he began to run our way. He ignored Aura when she jumped at him, hurrying to me with such stark urgency that I froze and nearly stumbled, wondering what awful news he bore. But he said nothing. Instead, his arms came around me hard. It was more like a grip than an embrace, harsh and convulsive as a wrestling lock, and I recoiled. Feeling this, he whispered that love had made him do what he did, that if it was less than honorable, he was sorry, truly sorry. He begged my forgiveness so abjectly that I stopped resisting. Instead, I laid my head on his shoulder and stood motionless until he felt silent. We both heaved long sighs. Eventually, I freed an arm and patted his back, feeling the smoothness between his shoulder blades, the soft curls at the base of his neck, the tense line of his jaw. He closed his eyes, and I kissed the tender places beneath them. "There is nothing to forgive," I said. And once again he embraced me, this time gently, yet with such persuasive longing that we were soon hurrying away from the palace, seeking some soft, hidden place where we could lie together. As we came to the sanctuary, Hippomenes reached for me. At his touch I discarded my clothing and my girl-haired piety with ludicrous haste. In the rapture of my desire for him, I overlooked the fact that we were on sacred ground. The gods, however, overlook nothing. Part 4. The Lion's Roar. 29. We live in the forest now, sleeping by day, hunting by night. Zeus changed us for defiling his sanctuary. We should have restrained ourselves that day, but we did not. Passion prevailed. We angered the Lord of all creation, and we paid the consequences. So now we are lions. In air that rippled and cracked with lightning, the bolts flew around us like burning reprimands. I watched my beloved's face grow broad and blunt, saw a mane spring up around it like a dusky golden cloud, saw his long, sinewy body fall to the ground and rise up transformed. If anything, he became even more beautiful. His eyes, large and uptilted, continued to regard me with unswerving devotion. My metamorphosis was equally swift and painless. We can no longer speak with words, but we manage quite well without them. Touch is its own infinite language, and we have come to understand it very well. Our other senses are much sharper also. I especially like my new ears, which turn and flick with ease, and my new nose, which is remarkably powerful. Hunting has never been more satisfying. Of course, many things were lost to us. Countless memories vanished. Those that spring up in sleep, vivid, startling pictures of another life, slip away like shadows when we wake. I remember animals best. A great, fragrant, woolly she-bear, an ugly boar, a dog, and a horse. Sometimes I growl when dreaming of my past, and then my mate wakes me. I know when he is dreaming because his tail switches. There are worse things than feeling his mighty tail brush my nose, so at such times I leave him in peace. Nevertheless, I woke him yesterday, not because he was restless, but because he was sleeping very soundly and I wanted his attention. I nudged him with my snout until at last he raised his head. Then I nipped him. This brought him fully awake. He glared at me, whiskers aflare. Purring, I flicked my tail. At last he caught a whiff of our newborn and was on his feet to inspect her. He bent his head to take in her scent more thoroughly. Then his golden eyes blazed, and he gave a long, full-throated roar of satisfaction, so loud that it drew twitters from the birds in the trees. It only made her burrow deeper into my side and suck harder. I liked her utter lack of fear, her instinct for survival. She would be a fine hunter. I would teach her myself. Author's note. Little is known about Greece in the 2nd millennium BC, the time when I have set this story, but most sources agree that fathers of the era were free to expose unwanted female children. All the many versions of Atalanta's story begin with the harsh fact that her father cast her out to die. Artemis's merciful intervention, Atalanta's athletic prowess, and her father's insistence that she return to the palace to marry are all constants. Hippomenes was sometimes known as Milanion, but he always sought Aphrodite's help, and she always gave him 3 golden apples. One popular version of the myth says that Hippomenes' ruse worked, that Atalanta lost the race because she stopped to examine the apples, as any woman would. Less well known is the story of the newlyweds' transformation into lions. It is sometimes an angry Zeus, sometimes an offended Aphrodite or Demeter who wreaks the change, but it is always intended as severe punishment. Other more obscure versions of Atalanta's story have her joining the quest for the Golden Fleece with Jason, and being healed of serpent-battling wounds by Medea, or going straight from the Caledonian boar hunt to King Peleus' funeral games, where she competed against the greatest wrestler of the age and won. She was a daring character. She was also seemingly capable of great cruelty. Her insistence on death for slow suitors appears almost bloodthirsty, yet it can be also seen as a desperate ploy to remain in Artemis's good graces. The goddess insisted on chastity, and Atalanta vowed it. As the swiftest mortal alive, she very well might have hoped that no man would be foolish enough to challenge her. If, thinking only of pleasing Artemis, she failed to imagine that Aphrodite might intervene, we cannot fault her. The immortal gods did as they pleased and were accountable only to each other. About the gods. Readers unfamiliar with Greek mythology may like to know a bit more about the gods who appear in Atalanta's story. Zeus, Artemis, Apollo, and Aphrodite are all part of the original pantheon said to rule from Mount Olympus. The others are Hera, Zeus's wife, Athena, his solemn, wise, virginal daughter, Ares, god of war, Demeter, goddess of the harvest, Dionysus, exuberant god of wine and intoxication, Hephaestus, god of fire, Hermes, the fleet messenger god, and Poseidon, Zeus's brother and lord of all the oceans. Eros appeared later, but figured prominently in many of the myths. Like so many divine rulers, the gods are related. Zeus, lord of all creation and mighty wielder of thunderbolts, was zealously paternal, producing children whenever and wherever he could. Among the many were Apollo and Artemis, and, with a different mother, Aphrodite. Zeus's wife Hera was notoriously jealous, with good reason. Artemis the Huntress was a forest goddess and protector of wild animals. Rigorously chaste, she oversaw women in childbirth, as well as young girls making the transition from childhood to womanhood. Her attributes and her association with the moon indicate she was absorbed into the Greek pantheon from an older culture, probably Cretan. Apollo, lord of the silver bow, god of prophecy, healing god, and inventor of music, was Artemis's younger twin, but very unlike her. Apollo often fell in love with both mortal women and nymphs. He fathered many children, including the great healer Asclepius, opposed barbarism, and maintained that moderation in all things was best. Aphrodite, goddess of love and Zeus's daughter, was beautiful, seductive, and extremely popular. She oversaw the sexual initiation of women. Aphrodite's arranged marriage to the lame smithy Hephaestus was not altogether happy. She took many lovers, including a wild sampling of the pantheon. Eros, Aphrodite's son, was a capricious boy whose invisible golden arrows had the power to inspire love in their targets. He shot both gods and mortals without plan, but with devastating accuracy, and was greatly feared.